along those lines. Okay, so let's take a look at how culture impacts our social, emotional, and mental health. I got a picture of a few things on here. One is Justin Bieber. He's obviously, I don't really need to say what his name is because you guys know him just by looking at him. He's somebody who's very popular for various reasons. But the reason I have him on here is because he and things like him, whether it's musicians or athletes or whatever it might be, have an influence on culture. And culture has an influence on you. What music you listen to, what TV shows you watch, things of that nature. Another thing I have on here is a Nike shoe. I'm noticing this is coming back in style. Nike shoes, dress is another important element of culture, right? There's if it isn't, why would somebody spend $100+ on a pair of tennis shoes, right? We make choices because we kind of want to fit in, and this fitting in, again, with that peer group thing. If your peer groups all has a certain kind of shoe or is dressing a certain way, it's natural for the individual to want to do that as well. Another element of culture is especially with middle schoolers are games, right? Xbox, probably talk about games. This one I have a picture on here is Clash of Clans in particular. I know we've been around talking about Clash of Clans, and other people have kind of heard about it and they've started playing too. It's a matter of wanting to belong to a social group. Games are a part of that too. Sports and activities such as band or different kinds of clubs are another really healthy way to have good peer groups and is another part of culture. Again, your friends, I know it was true for me. My friends were always usually the people that I played sports with. So the activities you do impact what your peer groups are going to be, and all that's part of culture. All that's part of culture. So let's take a look at communication skills. Communication is basically the clear exchange of ideas and information. The clear exchange of ideas and information. And you do this all the time without thinking about it. It can be anything from something really lighthearted to something more serious. But communication is basically a fundamental element of being social. And where this happens most is in relationships, and a relationship is a connection you have with another person or group. So you might have a relationship with your friends. You might have a relationship with different people at school, people on your team, so on and so forth. But this is all winds up being part of your peer group, people that you interact with on a regular basis. And that's why communication is an important part, because we want to be able to communicate well in our peer groups. Another element that affects mental, emotional, and social health are stress. Stress in and of itself is not a bad thing. There are two types of stress. One is called eustress. Eustress is positive stress. If you study for a test, let's say you spend an hour studying for a test and the next day you go in and take it and you do well on that test, well, you feel really good about your efforts. The effort you put into studying for it and taking the test is eustress. That's a very healthy thing. It's a very positive thing. It helps us grow cognitively, mentally, emotionally. Eustress is a good thing. Distress, on the other hand, is a bad thing. Distress is, take that test scenario again. Let's say you blew off the test and you didn't study for it. The next day comes around and now you got to take the test. Well, you're completely unprepared. So you take the test and you get a really bad grade on it. There's stress that comes from that. Even there you can go, oh, whatever, it's just a test, no big deal. Well, then your parents find out about it. And now you have to sit down with your parents and have communication in that relationship about a situation you didn't handle well. Those are two different kinds of stress. Now, stress is going to be present either way. The question is, and the important thing is to do, is to get more of that, as much of that eustress as we can as possible. Eustress is being prepared. It's the effort you put into something from a positive standpoint. Distress is that kind of negative stress that usually comes from not putting the time in that we need to into different things. Okay, anxiety is another element of mental, emotional, and social health. Anxiety are feelings of uncertainty or worry over what might happen. There are times when anxiety is kind of a fleeting thing. You're really anxious about that test that you need to take. Even though you studied and you're prepared and everything, you still have a certain amount of anxiety. Well, it's important to learn to deal with that. It's important to say to yourself, you know what, I've studied for this, I'm prepared for this, I'm going to go and do a really good job on this test. There are times when anxiety can be so overwhelming that it's important to reach out and talk to somebody, a parent or a counselor or something like that. And in extreme cases, there can be times when anxiety becomes kind of a disorder and needs to be medicated and dealt with professionally. Okay, this is a really interesting one. Fight or flight. You might have heard of this before. You ever had, if you play a sport or if you're in the band, you might have a competition or a performance coming up, and you kind of get butterflies in your stomach. You ever heard that term before? Well, that refers to flight or fight, and that's your body's natural way of deciding, am I going to stay and deal with this stress? And I'm going to use the word stressor. Stressor is just something that causes stress. Or am I going to run from it? So when you're getting ready, say for a football game or a performance, you might have that I don't know if I can do it. It also call it nerves. It's you kind of deciding, you know what, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do a good job. That's kind of the fight. If you decide, I can't do it, and you just we would say kind of chickening out or whatever it might be, that might be the flight side of it. Okay, so fight or flight is a very natural feeling that people have when we're dealing with different circumstances. It's important to understand and identify that that's all that's happening and to deal with it in a healthy manner. Empathy. Empathy is a really important skill to have when you're working in relationships, when you're working in peer groups, and it's the ability to identify and share another person's feelings. Being empathetical is to understand how a person's feeling, why they're feeling that way, and be able to communicate that back to them. The reason that's important is because what that does is it validates where that person's position is, what their feelings are, how they're feeling about a certain situation. Again, we talked about conflict before. Empathy is a really important skill in dealing with conflict because it's really helpful to understand where the other person's coming from. You might have heard the phrase "walk a mile in my shoes." It's that kind of refers to just understanding where the other person's coming from, or how they're feeling, or what they're thinking about a certain topic, and that's what empathy is. Body language, when we're talking about communication, body language is a really important thing to be aware of. It's kind of a skill you acquire over time as you live and you're in social situations and you're talking and doing that kind of stuff. And you've probably seen this before if you think of your peer groups and talking to people. If you say something to somebody, they might turn around and brighten up and get really excited. Well, you know that they like what you had to tell them. In other cases, you might say something to somebody and they kind of slump over and look down and that kind of thing. Well, in that case, they might feel bad about what you had to say. But understanding body language is a really important skill when it comes to communication. Okay, so there's several different kinds of listening, and it's really important to determine these different kinds of listening. So we're going to talk about that right now. We got a person here listening, and we're ready to go. Okay, so the best kind of listening is called active listening. If you were to talk to somebody and they're speaking to you, it's important. Active listening would be making eye contact with them, maybe nodding your head at appropriate times, kind of saying, hey, what I'm hearing you say is this, using phrases like that, being in a posture where you're focused on what they're saying. That's active listening. Okay, passive listening. This has become a really big problem in our culture today, because what happens a lot of times is somebody will start talking to you, and I know I've done this before, are say on your cell phone, checking your texts, your messages, maybe you're even playing a game or doing something like that. Well, that sends a signal to the person that you're not interested in what they're saying very much. You're certainly more interested in your text message or whatever it might be. It's a negative thing. It just kind of says, I don't care about what you're saying. That's passive listening. Passive listening is, yeah, I'm listening, but I'm not really engaged in what you're saying, right? If you compare that to active listening, that phone would be up. If the phone were to ring, you might even silence a ringer or something like that and put it aside and say, hey, I want to make sure I'm giving you my full attention here. So that's active and passive listening. The third one is aggressive listening. And this is comes about a lot of times as an intimidation factor, right? Maybe you're in a heated conversation with somebody and they're listening to you and they're engaged in what you're saying, but you're kind of getting a sense from them that, wow, this guy's really like upset about something, or I'm really concerned about this person's behavior. Aggressive listening, this person might shout back at you instead of active listening, saying, hey, I'm hearing you say this. An aggressive listening statement might be something to the effect of, I don't care what you have to say, so on and so forth, whatever it might be. Right. So if we look at these three, we have a spectrum. Passive is completely unengaged. Aggressive is way too engaged, almost to a point of anger or something like that. Active listening does a really good job of respecting where a person's at, understanding what they're saying to you, and communicates that you care about what they're saying, which is very affirming for the person who's talking to you. When I say affirming, I mean it says, hey, what you're saying is important. Okay? Assertive listening is kind of another way to say active listening. Assertive listening is just creating a sense of providing feedback while listening that indicates you have concern for and understand what the person is saying to you. This is a very, very important skill in life. It's very important to be able to have a back and forth, give and take conversation with the person about whatever it is you might be talking about. So that's assertive listening. Okay, iMessages. iMessages are really important, and it's a really good way to communicate. Let's say somebody says, "Hey, I didn't like how you handled that certain situation yesterday, whatever it might be. I felt like it was the wrong thing to do. I think it had this consequence, that kind of thing." So instead of you saying back to them, which would be aggressive, well, I don't care what you think, or in a passive sense, kind of going, no, whatever, right? Those two, aggressive, passive, not good. An iMessage allows you to be an assertive listener. Like, what you might say in this case is, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is you didn't like how I handled the situation, and you didn't like how I handled it for these reasons. Okay, well, let's talk about that. This is why I handled the situation that way. I thought this way about it, whatever it might be. And that person can then say back to you, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is you handled it this way. Communicating that way allows people to communicate to each other that they understand what each other's perspective is. And when you understand what each other's perspective is, you're more likely to listen and to have a positive conversation and an outcome from that. So iMessages, excuse me, there's a few of them out here. I feel this way when you, whatever it might be. I would appreciate it if, so on and so forth. And again, it's how you say this too. If you say something like, well, I would appreciate it if blah, 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 well, that's aggressive. Right? We don't want to do that. We want to say, hey, I'd appreciate it if you kind of did this in the future. You know what I mean? So that's an example of iMessages. Mixed messages is a negative communication device, which can also be kind of a form of manipulation. An example of this might be where, let's say you're talking to your buddy and you want to go to this movie, and they kind of say, oh yeah, well we'll go in an hour, and then they might say shortly after that, I don't really think I want to go to the movie anymore, but maybe I do. You just don't really know where the person stands on something. It's important not to communicate this way. Say, hey, another way to say it if you're changing your mind is, I'm not sure if I want to go to the movie. Let's kind of see where we're at in an hour. So you give that person a definitive timeline on when you might have that conversation again, but you're not mixing your messages and confusing that person on purpose. That's kind of what mixed messages are. Okay, so that's our discussion on mental, emotional, and social health from the GLEs. We covered the topics of information of family and peers and communication skills. I use these sites to just giving credit to images in this case. So I'll go ahead and scroll these. And thanks a lot. Make sure that you're pausing. If you have any questions, let me know. Make sure that you're pausing the video and doing the reflective questions.